Welcome to the new module on disease of the kidney. In the previous module, we have discussed about the nephrotic syndrome. In this module, we are going to discuss about APSGN, that is acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. There are many similarities between the APSGN and nephrotic syndrome, and sometimes it is very difficult to differentiate clinically between APSGN and nephrotic syndrome. This is because sometimes the APSGN can present to us with nephrotic syndrome. So first let us understand the pathophysiology of APSGN, then we will clinically correlate with the clinical features and pathophysiology together, as well as we will differentiate between APSGN and nephrotic syndrome, and we will learn how we can clinically differentiate between APSGN and nephrotic syndrome. APSGN is a type of acute glomerulonephritis. There are so many conditions which can lead to acute glomerulonephritis, but APSGN is one of the most common conditions which can lead to acute glomerulonephritis. So let us understand the pathophysiology of APSGN. APSGN basically start with an bacterial infection, that is the group A beta hemolytic streptococcus. This group A beta hemolytic streptococcus can reach the child through two mechanisms. It can either cause an upper respiratory tract infection, that is pharyngitis. It can cause pharyngitis or sore throat, or it can cause skin infection, that is pyoderma. The strain which cause pharyngitis are the 4 and 12, and the strain which cause pyoderma or skin infection is 49. So after reaching the child, this bacteria, the streptococcus, the group A beta hemolytic streptococcus, will produce an immune response. The antigen of this streptococcus will initiate an immune response in the child. The immune response of the child is initiated by this streptococcus, group A beta hemolytic streptococcus, and the immune response of the child produces an antibody. Now this antibody along with this antigen can form immune complex. And this immune complex is now deposited on the glomerulus. So in this way, the antigen and antibody combines with each other and is deposited on the glomerulus. This is the one mechanism which can lead to glomerulus damage. The other mechanism which can lead to glomerulus damage is that this antibody can directly go and destroy the glomerulus. This is because the antibody which is produced in response to streptococcal antigen mimics the glomerulus antigen, that is, glomerulus contain a protein known as SPEB protein and M protein. So these two proteins of the glomerulus mimic the streptococcal antigen. So as the antibody is produced against the streptococcal antigen, now in turn of destroying the streptococcal antigen, this antibody cross react with the glomerular protein, that is SPEB and M protein, and it destroy the glomerulus. This type of mimicry is known as molecular mimicry. So we have learned that there is two mechanisms of glomerular destruction. The first one is the immune response producing antibody, and this antibody combining with the streptococcal antigen and is now deposited on the glomerulus. The second mechanism is the molecular mimicry, in which the antibody which is produced cross-react with the glomerular antigen. This is because the glomerular antigen is similar to that of streptococcal antigen, and assuming it to a foreign antigen, now this antibody goes and react to the glomerular antigen, that is SPE, and M protein, and this leads to glomerular destruction or glomerular damage. When there is immune complex deposition on the glomerulus, it leads to activation of a complement pathway. So this glomerular complex can lead to activation of complement pathway, that is the C3 pathway. So in this way, glomerular damage occur due to streptococcal antigen, leading to production of antibody that mimics, that is the antigen of which mimics the glomerular antigen. So when there is glomerular damage, due to antibody antigen deposition as well as antibody cross-reacting with the glomerular antigen, this lead to leak, and this leak result in hematuria and proteinuria. There is a leak in the glomerulus. The glomerulus has been damaged by the antibody antigen complex, which result in leak, and now the RBC start filtering through this unit, the filtration unit, as well as protein starts filtering through this unit, which result in hematuria and proteinuria. This proteinuria can cause hypoalbuminemia, and now this hypoalbuminemia can cause edema. As there is reduced albumin in the circulation, now the osmotic function of the protein is lost. As the protein is lost, osmotic function of the circulating fluid is lost, which result in shifting of fluid from one compartment to other compartment, resulting in edema. And as there is edema and shifting of fluid from one compartment to other compartment, this result in reduced blood flow to the oxygen. As fluid is shifted from one to another compartment, the circulating compartment volume is reduced as a whole, and this result in reduced blood flow to the kidney, which result in activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system causes sodium and water reabsorption. Sodium and water reabsorption further contribute to edema. As well as when there is activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, this activation of renin-angiotensin cause release of angiotensinogen 2, which is a potent vasoconstrictor, and it lead to hypertension. And sometimes the hypertension is so severe that it can precipitate hypertensive encephalopathy. Hypertensive encephalopathy. Hypertension is so severe that it can precipitate hypertensive encephalopathy as well as heart failure. The heart failure in this case is due to increase in the afterload. As there is hypertension, there is increase in the afterload, which result in heart failure, and the heart failure can result in pulmonary edema. As there is failure of the ventricle, it result in back pressure and increase in the pressure of the atrium, increase in the pressure of the left atrium, which result in pulmonary congestion and finally leak through the pulmonary capillary, resulting in pulmonary edema. So in this way, the streptococcal antigen can produce various pathophysiological manifestation in the child. Initially, there is an infection of streptococcal. It can be either a sore throat, that is pharyngitis, or it can be a skin infection, that is pyoderma. After infection, the antigen of the streptococcus produces an immune response, and in return of the immune response, the child's immune system produces antibody. Now this antibody can itself go and destroy the glomerulus due to molecular mimicry, or it can combine with the streptococcal antigen and get deposited on the glomerular unit. And as the antigen antibody complex is deposited in the filtration unit, it leads to activation of the complement pathway as well as destruction of the glomerulus. And once the glomerular damage occurs, it results in leak, and this leak results in hematuria and proteinuria. Proteinuria results in edema due to reduced osmotic pressure of the circulating fluid, and in turn this edema can activate renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, which can cause sodium and water reabsorption, and this can further contribute to edema. And in turn, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system releases angiotensinogen 2, which is a potent vasoconstrictor, which results in hypertension. This hypertension can sometimes precipitate hypertensive encephalopathy as well as heart failure. Heart failure in turn can lead pulmonary edema. So this is the basic pathophysiology of APSGN. Once you have understand the basic pathophysiology of APSGN, now when we study the clinical feature of APSGN, it will be very easy for you to know how a particular constellation of symptoms has been occurring in a patient of APSGN. So now let us discuss about the clinical feature of APSGN. APSGN basically it commonly occurs in a school going children. It occurs in a school going child, that is 5 to 12 years of age. It starts with an streptococcal infection. As I told you, it starts with an streptococcal infection. So there is an antecedent history of sore throat or skin infection, that is pyoderma. There is a history of sore throat or skin infection. When there is a history of sore throat and in a gap in between, and after that there is a signs and symptoms of APSGN, this gap is usually around 1 to 2 weeks. When there is a sore throat, there is usually a gap of 1 to 2 weeks. And when there is a skin infection followed by signs and symptoms of APSGN, there is usually a gap of 3 to 4 weeks. This is because the sore throat can produce the immune response, or sore throat can initiate the immune response very quickly than the pyoderma or skin infection. So usually in skin infection there is a longer gap as compared to sore throat. After the initial period of gap, there is the signs and symptoms of APSGN. These signs and symptoms, sometimes the antecedent history may be absent. This is not because the infection or the sore throat or skin infection has not occurred, but this is because the patient cannot recall the incident of a sore throat or cannot recall the incident of a skin infection because it was subclinical or it does not require any intervention. So sometimes there may be no history of sore throat or skin infection. This is not because it has not occurred, but it is because the patient cannot remember the incident of sore throat or skin infection. So after that, the antigen antibody complex is deposited and there is glomerular damage which resulted in hematuria. So hematuria is one of the clinical features of APSGN, and this hematuria gives a characteristic color to the urine known as cola colored urine. Cola color urine is due to hematuria, and this hematuria is for a brief period, usually for around 1 week. And due to proteinuria, as we have discussed, there is edema. And the onset of edema is there is abrupt onset of edema in APSGN as compared to nephrotic syndrome, which was insidious in onset. So this abrupt onset of edema has led to severe activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, which in turn has caused hypertension. So this is the reason why hypertension is present in APSGN and not in nephrotic syndrome, because in nephrotic syndrome edema was gradual in onset, but in APSGN edema is very sudden in onset, which led to activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system very strongly and hence led to hypertension. So this edema is sudden onset edema, which resulted in puffiness of the face, and this sudden activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system will result in hypertension in a child, and this hypertension can precipitate hypertensive encephalopathy. So how a child of hypertensive encephalopathy will present to us? In addition to the symptoms of APSGN, that is edema and hematuria, if the patient is having an hypertensive encephalopathy, he or she may have a blurred vision. He can also present to us with headache due to hypertensive encephalopathy, and sometimes seizure may be present in patient of hypertensive encephalopathy, as well as altered mental status. So this hypertension can sometimes lead to heart failure. The signs and symptoms of heart failure will be present in a patient of APSGN which had led to the cause of hypertension, and heart failure can lead to pulmonary edema. The patient with heart failure and pulmonary edema will present to us with respiratory distress, cough and orthopnea. Due to edema, there is oliguria. Due to shifting of fluid from one compartment to the another compartment, there is reduced blood flow to the kidney, which resulted in reduced GFR and in turn the urine output, which resulted in oliguria, that is reduced urine output. So the mechanism of oliguria is edema, which resulted in shifting of fluid from one compartment to the other compartment. It depends upon the severity of the glomerular damage and the progression of edema. So oliguria is due to edema which resulted in shifting of the fluid from one compartment to the other compartment. So in this way we have learned how the pathophysiology can guide us to identify the clinical feature of nephrotic syndrome. Once you know the pathophysiology of this APSGN and nephrotic syndrome, you will very easily identify the clinical feature of both this disease. In nephrotic syndrome, the edema was gradual in onset, which has not led to the activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system so strongly, but in nephritic syndrome or APSGN, the edema is sudden in onset, which led to activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system so strongly that a potent vasoconstrictor angiotensinogen 2 has caused hypertension, and hypertension can lead to heart failure, pulmonary edema, and it can also precipitate hypertensive encephalopathy. So this is the reason why there is presence of hypertension and heart failure in patient of APSGN. Once you have understand the pathophysiology of APSGN, you can very easily identify the clinical feature of APSGN. Once you see a patient of APSGN, all this pathophysiology should start coming in your mind, and the clinical feature can be very easily identified in the patient of APSGN. So this was about the pathophysiology and the clinical feature of APSGN. Now how will we do some investigation to finally confirm the diagnosis of APSGN? So now let us discuss about the diagnostic investigation which we have to do in a patient of APSGN. As there is proteinuria and hematuria, the urine examination will show us an RBC in the urine, and this RBC is filtered through the filtration unit, and it has to pass through the nephron, the tubules of the nephron, and when it passed through the tubules of the nephron, it casts the shape of the tubules of the nephron. So RBC casting the shape of the tubule of the nephron can be found in urine, that is known as RBC cast. Protein can be found in urine. But what is important to know here is that there is no severe proteinuria in nephritic syndrome or APSGN as compared to nephrotic syndrome. In nephritic syndrome, you can usually find 1+ or 2+ proteinuria. But in nephrotic syndrome, we have found 3+ or 4+ proteinuria, that is heavy proteinuria. The grading of proteinuria has been described in nephrotic syndrome module. You can go and watch it there. So in urine examination, we can find RBC cast and proteinuria. When you check the serum complement level, it will be decreased in nephritic syndrome. As there is activation of the complement system and deposition of the complement in the glomerulus due to antigen-antibody complex depositing in the filtration unit, and it has led to activation of the complement, and when you check the serum complement level, it will be decreased because all the complement system has been activated and has been deposited in the glomerulus, hence reducing the serum complement level. For antecedent streptococcal infection, we can do an ASO titer. But what is important to know here, that the rising ASO titer is more important than a single value ASO titer. Rising ASO titer will confirm the diagnosis of antecedent streptococcal infection. When you do a throat swab, sometimes it may come positive, sometimes it may come negative. It will not take us to the diagnosis of antecedent streptococcal infection. Suppose if it come positive, the patient or the child may be either in carrier state, or he or she may have suffered the disease long ago and resulted in carrier state, or he or she may have actually suffered the disease. So doing a throat swab or throat culture cannot help us differentiate the previous history of streptococcal, the carrier state, or the actual infection. So it is better to do ASO titer, and the ASO titer, if we found to be a rising ASO titer, then we can be very sure that this child has suffered from streptococcal infection few weeks back. Suppose the child has not suffered from sore throat, but he has suffered from skin infection, pyoderma, then the ASO titer does not have any significance in diagnosing antecedent skin infection or pyoderma. In this case, we have to do another test known as anti-DNS-B test. So anti-DNS-B test is specific for skin infection or pyoderma. So we have to consider other cause of nephritic syndrome other than post-streptococcal nephritic syndrome and do investigation accordingly. Suppose a nephritic syndrome due to other cause other than APSGN can present to us with a history of joint pain and rash. In this condition, we have to suspect that nephritic syndrome is due to a disease, systemic disease known as SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus. There are many causes which can lead to nephritic syndrome. Nephritic syndrome can be either due to infection, that is post-infection, as one which we have discussed is the acute post-streptococcal infection. Post other viral infection, nephritic syndrome can be present, or it can be due to non-infectious cause like SLE or lupus nephritis. So we have to consider the other cause of nephritic syndrome in a child and investigate accordingly. So now let us discuss about the complication of nephritic syndrome. As I told you that there is hypertension, and hypertension can lead to hypertensive encephalopathy. So a hypertensive encephalopathy is one of the complications of nephritic syndrome or APSGN. The patient of hypertensive encephalopathy will, in addition to the signs and symptoms of APSGN, that is edema and hematuria, he or she can present to you with a blurred vision, headache, convulsion and altered mental sensorium. Oliguria can lead to renal failure in a patient of APSGN, that is the nitrogenous waste product is now retained in the body due to oliguria. There is not sufficient amount of urine to excrete the nitrogenous waste product, and it can result in retention of nitrogenous waste product in the body, that is urea and creatinine, and can result in renal failure. Hypertension in APSGN can precipitate heart failure, or it can cause heart failure, and heart failure in turn it can cause pulmonary edema. So these are the different complications of APSGN: the hypertensive encephalopathy, renal failure, heart failure and pulmonary edema. Now let us discuss the management of APSGN, how a patient of APSGN